Nobody was going to let me make a TV series that was just about two men riding around talking. So I put a murder in there. If you want to be a writer, stop being a personal assistant. If you're worth a damn as a writer, there's no character whose point of view you can't imagine and understand empathetically. It was the summer of 2010. My novel had just been published, and I was desperate to get out of academia. And since the early 2000s, I had wanted to find a way into television because American television had gotten so good with The Sopranos and The Wire and Deadwood. There was this time period when those three shows were on where I became conscious that my desire for fiction was being fed in a much richer way through these shows than I was feeling from contemporary novels. So my novel was optioned for film rights, and there was no money there, but it allowed me to talk to Hollywood agents. And so I asked them what I had to do to get into television, and they said, you have to write scripts. Have you ever written scripts before? And I said, no. And they said, well, if you can write a good pilot for a show you invent and a good episode of an existing show, we can start trying to get you work. And in July of 2010, I wrote 6 television scripts. And one of them was the pilot for True Detective.
This place is like somebody's memory of a town, and the memory's fading. It's like there was never anything here but jungle.
The crime story both gives you a plot and a series of escalations and pressures that you can put onto your characters, but it also tends to offer a kind of cross-sectional view of the society in which the crime takes place, because the nature of an investigation is that you will be exposed to all these facets of a place.
That was definitely one of the basic structural goals of the series, was to use the machinery of the procedural to get at what interests me, which is the dissection of character and motivation and a world vision that can encompass those things and reflect them.
Nobody was going to let me make a TV series that was just about two men riding around talking. So I put a murder in there. Every character and every one of us is in some way a stereotype. We only cease to be stereotypes when we examine a character in detail. We have 2 cops riding around in a car and they don't exactly get along. Ever seen that before? Right? That in itself was a trope that I wanted to take apart and take another look at, right? This is not going to be what you think it is. We're going to do things like spend 6 minutes riding around in a car discussing pessimistic philosophy.
Means I'm bad at parties.
Let me tell you, you ain't great outside of parties either.
To me, Cole more than Hart, but both of them are heroic. Now, both of them are incredibly flawed as men in society. Like, Hart might be a bad husband and father. Cole might be a terrible friend and colleague in some respects. But they both behave with bravery and with honor in moments where many of us might not.
I mean, in a way, there's various means by which I was working out a lot of personal subjects, which is what I do in my fiction too. Both men were representative of 2 different kinds of bad roads I could have imagined myself on. But I find Cole admirable at the end of the day. I think his tragic flaw is that, he has a huge blind spot like everyone else does when it comes to himself. I've said before that he's certainly not a nihilist. He'd be the most unsuccessful nihilist in history. If anything, everything is overwrought with meaning for Cole. He's hypersensitive. We find out he's has synesthesia. And in that way, what he's talking about with meditating on the idea of your own crucifixion is that for him to wake up and encounter the world and do this job is a form of self-crucifixion, because he's so extremely sensitive. And his use of this kind of Frankenstein homegrown antinatalist philosophy strikes me frequently as defensive to the point he protests too much. His complaints aren't very different from Job's complaints.
If you believe in a personal God who has a destiny for everyone, well, then you're just a character in his story.
And Job's complaint was that he was a character in a story and he didn't like how the story was being told. So you have to ask, who's Cole complaining to?
World needs bad men. We keep the other bad men from the door.
I think there's dangerous people in the world, and that dangerous people are often called upon to combat them. It's an old adage that there's a very thin line between a good cop and a good criminal. They share a lot of the same traits: a brashness, a boldness, tenaciousness, an egotism to some degree, an obsessiveness. The simplest argument is fight fire with fire, but I think Cole's point goes more towards Cole wouldn't say anybody wasn't a bad man. One of the things I think is most admirable about him, to me at least, is that he has this very rigid code of honor that no one gave him, that seems to sit outside of the culture. That's why he's an oddball with the other police officers, because his code of honor has nothing to do with their cultural contexts. You know, one of the interesting dichotomies between the two men is that the one man has literally nothing governing him, and he keeps himself rigidly self-governed. And the one that has a family and should be more governed uses that as an excuse to go ungoverned.
If you're worth a damn as a writer, there's no character whose point of view you can't imagine and understand empathetically.
I don't use $10 words as much as you, but for a guy who sees no point in existence, you sure fret about it an awful lot.
If you look at Cole, you see actually he's the rote, typical, extremely hard-boiled detective figure, but what I wanted to do beyond that was to give that figure real dimensionality, to really be hard-boiled and to have that way of being. What sorts of philosophies does that imply? He has the disposition and the means to articulate the thoughts and philosophies behind that sort of hard-boiled behavior. In that way, he's almost like the authentic version of what Hart pretends to be.
For me, he's what Huck Finn becomes in the 21st century. You know, you remember Huckleberry Finn when he could free slave Jim, but everything he's been taught tells him that if I free this man, I'm going to hell.
Yeah.
I'm gonna burn in hell forever. And Huck Finn frees his friend, the slave, and Huck says, basically, fuck it, I'll go to hell.
Yeah.
And that's Rust.
The public's sort of fascination with serial killers have almost turned them into comic book villains. And I wanted a killer whose story was not so complicated that unraveling it was going to take up all our time. The more simple and solid your plot is, the more free you are to explore ways of telling that haven't been tried yet, and to take discursive detours in conversation and scene.
Life's barely long enough to get good at one thing.
If that long.
Yeah, so be careful what you get good at.
I think the big tip would be to learn your craft as well as you possibly can, to learn what you do well and what moves you. When you read your stuff, your own stuff, be honest with how bad it is and look at it and find the places where it does come alive, even if just for a sec, even if it's just a line, because that right there is the key to unlocking what is going to make you successful. If you want to be a writer, stop being a personal assistant. Like, you can't learn to be a writer if you're spending 15 hours a day taking care of somebody. You need to go live somewhere where you have a really low overhead and dedicate yourself for years to learning how to do this, instead of hoping, well, if I service the right executive the right amount of years, maybe they'll let me, you know, be like get into a writer's room or something like that. Like, the best thing you can walk in with is good work. And the way you get good work is by learning your craft and confronting who you are as a creator. You know, what do you do well? What is your voice? Yes, you admire these people and you enjoy these people, but you can't be them. And so don't try to be them. The world already has them.
Yeah.
Who are you? As I reminded myself, what got us here, wherever here is, you know, in success or failure, is me writing in a vacuum and pursuing the vision I wanted. And I'm not in the service industry. You know, I'm not asking the internet, well, how would you like your TV? Can I get you anything with it? Oh, you don't like that TV? Let me get you some new TV.
I had never tried to make a jump into this field because it seemed like there were so many class and financial and geographic boundaries between me and it. And then what I learned was, you know, if you come in with good work, they don't want to keep good talent out. That's a total myth of the entertainment industry. They want to monetize talent and bring it in.
Hey, thanks for watching. Next week's video is going to be on Black Mirror, so subscribe now so you know when that video drops. In the meantime, here are 2 more videos that I think that you will really enjoy. I'll see you guys next week.